There was a crash upstairs. A loud, sharp, unmistakable crash. Ethan Grayson froze. The kind of frozen that wasn't physical but instinctive, where every part of you stills because your brain hasn't caught up to what it just heard. The noise echoed through the high-ceilinged townhouse like a stone skipping across water. For a brief second, it was the only sound. No sirens, no city noise from outside. Just that single, sharp crash, followed by silence so thick it felt unnatural. Ethan put his espresso cup down slowly. It clicked against the saucer like a warning bell. He looked toward the ceiling, directly above him, where the nursery was. This didn't make sense. No one else was supposed to be here. His son, Jamie, was at boarding school 2 hours away. The nanny, Marisol, was fired a week ago. He hadn't even been home in 2 days. Just got back from a business trip in Toronto. There should have been nothing and no one up there. But there was the sound. Real. Deliberate. He waited for another noise. None came. Ethan walked toward the stairs. Not fast, calculated. Controlled. Like someone in the boardroom about to handle a high-stakes deal. This was his nature, measured, logical, never led by emotion. A man who turned struggling properties into gold, whose instincts rarely failed him. But as he ascended, something unexpected stirred in him. Not fear. Not yet. But a sensation he hadn't felt in a long time, disquiet. He passed the second landing, glancing briefly at the guest rooms. All doors closed. Untouched. Then he reached the nursery door. Slightly ajar. He hadn't left it like that. He knew it. For a moment, Ethan stood at the threshold, staring at the slim slice of darkness between the door and frame. The soft hum of the baby monitor inside, a relic of habit, still plugged in though Jamie hadn't used it in months, created a faint static sound. It crackled slightly, irregularly. He pushed the door open. Soft moonlight spilled through the sheer curtains. The room looked exactly as it had the last time he was here. The pastel walls. The wooden crib. The mobile with clouds and stars dangling above. The shelf of picture books no one read. Everything was in its place. Except one thing. A photograph sat on the crib mattress. Propped up like a display. It hadn't been there before. He would have noticed. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. It was a photo of Jamie. But not in this room. In the photo, his son was curled up on a mattress. Not the soft, high-end crib mattress he was used to, but a rough, bare one, barely covered by a thin, stained sheet. The walls behind him were peeling, yellowed, as if they belonged in an abandoned house. The room was poorly lit, cold. Jamie looked asleep. Peaceful, even. But something about the photo chilled Ethan to his core. And then he saw it. At the bottom of the picture, scrawled in jagged red ink. Like it had been written in haste, or rage. He cried for you. A shockwave went through him. He almost dropped the photo. He backed away, heart now pounding in his chest. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a joke. Someone had been in his home. Someone had gone into the nursery. Someone had left this here, knowing it would unnerve him. He whipped out his phone and dialed. "Jillian," he said when his assistant picked up. "Get the security company on the line. Now. It's midnight. I don't care. Somebody was in my house. I want the feed pulled for the last 72 hours. He hung up before she could ask more. Ethan paced the nursery, eyes scanning for signs of a break-in. Nothing. No open windows. No forced entry. No signs of disturbance, except that photo. That one terrible photo. He called the boarding school next. The headmaster sounded groggy. I need confirmation, Ethan said, cutting to the point. Is my son still at St. Alden's? Mr. Grayson, of course. Jamie is safe. Asleep, I believe. It's the middle of the night. I need to see him. Now. Video. Something. There was a pause. Then, reluctantly, the headmaster agreed to walk to the dormitory and confirm. Ethan waited, fingers tapping against the windowsill. 2 minutes. Then 3. The video came through. Jamie, asleep in his dorm bed, hugging his blue stuffed whale, the one Marisol had sewn for him 2 years ago. His chest rose and fell peacefully. Ethan exhaled. Still, it didn't explain the photo. Where was it taken? And by whom? Earlier that year, when he had fired Marisol, there was no drama. No threats. No scene. She had seemed shocked, yes, but accepted it quietly. He'd let her go because Jamie had started having nightmares. Waking up screaming. Saying strange things like, "She talks to the walls," or, "She said Daddy's lying." Ethan chalked it up to a child's imagination. Stress, maybe. Marisol had always been kind, attentive. A little old-fashioned, sure, but trustworthy. Or so he thought. But now he wasn't sure. Ethan left the nursery, locking the door behind him. He spent the next 2 hours going over security footage. Nothing. No one entered the house. No signs of a break-in. And yet, the photo sat in the crib. Impossible. He couldn't sleep that night. The next morning, he drove to his office, but couldn't concentrate. Emails blurred. Phone calls felt distant. He kept thinking about the message. "He cried for you." It felt like an accusation. A verdict passed. And it wasn't just about the photo. It was about something deeper. Something he didn't want to look at too closely. That afternoon, he went through Marisol's old records. He had a copy of her resume somewhere. Jillian found it. As he scanned it, something caught his eye. Her listed address at the time of hiring, an apartment in Brooklyn, was crossed out and replaced later in the file. No explanation. Just a P.O. box. Strange. He asked Jillian to do a quiet background check. Not through official HR channels. Just, quietly. He told himself it was just to cover his bases. But something gnawed at him. When Jillian called back 3 hours later, her voice was hesitant. "Marisol doesn't exist." "What do you mean?" "The name. The social. The credentials. All fake. Whoever she was, she never worked at the places she listed. And that P.O. box? It was registered under another fake name. No trace after that." Ethan felt the room tilt slightly. He gripped the desk edge. "How the hell did she get through our screening?" "I don't know," Jillian whispered. That night, he went back home. As soon as he walked through the door, he noticed it. A faint smell. Like burnt sugar and mold. Sweet and sour. He followed it, and it led him back to the nursery. He unlocked the door. Everything looked the same. Except now, on the windowsill, sat something new. A lock of Jamie's hair, tied in a red thread. And next to it, a feather. Black. Thin. Too large to be a bird from this area. Ethan stumbled back. He didn't understand what was happening. But he knew this wasn't random. Whoever Marisol was, whatever her reason for coming into their lives, this was no longer about childcare. It was about something else entirely. And it wasn't over. Not even close. The air in the nursery felt colder now. Not just from the faint draft through the sealed windows, it was something else. Something that made Ethan Grayson's skin tighten across his bones. He stared at the objects on the windowsill. A lock of Jamie's honey-brown hair, tied in a red thread, looped thrice. Symbolic. Deliberate. And beside it, the feather. Jet black, oddly smooth, long and curved. Not like any bird he could name. Too elegant. Too unnatural. It sat there like an offering. Or a threat. He didn't touch either. Instead, he took photos. Sent them to Jillian. "Get me an ornithologist," he texted. "And someone who can ID ritual objects." He hesitated, then added. Quietly. By the next morning, Jillian had pulled strings. The feather was identified by a wildlife specialist as likely belonging to a greater adjutant stork, a scavenger bird found only in parts of South Asia. Specifically, Northeast India. Ethan blinked at the report. What the hell is a stork from Assam doing in my son's nursery? But the other expert, a cultural anthropologist with a background in folk religions, was more direct. The red-threaded lock of hair disturbed him. "It's not just symbolic," the man said, over a secure Zoom call. "In some traditions, hair bound this way is a link. A connection spell. An anchor between two spirits, or between a person and something else. Whoever placed it might be trying to create a bridge." "A bridge to what?" Ethan asked, voice flat. The man hesitated. "To whatever they believe is watching. Or waiting." Ethan hung up. His world, all logic, all structure, was cracking at the edges. He wasn't a man who believed in spirits or curses. His life had been built on stock markets and profit margins. He trusted algorithms, not ancient symbols. And yet, every new thread in this web pulled him further from the world he understood. He needed answers. Not speculation. Not myths. He needed Marisol. She'd been with them for 3 years. The perfect hire on paper. Gentle. Educated. A natural with Jamie. She had never once asked for a raise. Rarely took time off. She didn't even have social media, which Ethan had initially appreciated as old-school discretion. Now it seemed less like discretion and more like a cover. Jillian found something else. A security deposit made to an apartment in Harlem, under a pseudonym Ethan recognized from Marisol's reference sheet. The unit had been vacated weeks ago, cleaned out thoroughly. No trace left. Except one. The building superintendent remembered her. "Nice lady," he said. "But strange. Always left the windows open. Burned weird incense. And she kept a room locked at all times. Said it was for prayer." He paused. "Once I had to fix the radiator, and I caught a glimpse inside. Walls were covered in symbols. Chalk or paint, I don't know. I didn't ask." "Symbols?" Ethan asked. "What kind?" The man just shook his head. "Didn't look Christian, that's all I'll say." Ethan drove home in silence that evening. He didn't go straight inside. Instead, he circled to the backyard. Something about the house no longer felt safe. The windows stared blankly back at him, like watching eyes. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through the nursery photos again. Zoomed in on the feather. The thread. The picture of Jamie, lying in a strange room. And then he saw it. Barely visible in the far corner of the photo, behind Jamie, was a wall pattern. A crescent moon. 3 dots. A line through the center. He swore he'd seen it before. He ran upstairs. Into the attic. This was the only room he hadn't checked since returning from Toronto. It was mostly storage, old furniture, dusty boxes, forgotten heirlooms. But one box sat in the center of the floor, too clean. Too new. He opened it. Inside were Jamie's baby clothes, ones that had been donated years ago. But they'd been returned. And on top of the folded onesies, tucked into the fabric, was a black notebook. No label. He opened it. What he found inside didn't feel real. The first pages were filled with notes in Marisol's neat handwriting. But not childcare notes. Not feeding schedules or appointments. These were observations. About Ethan. About Jamie. About the house. Day 6, he lies about his work. Jamie knows it. He hears things Ethan doesn't. Day 27, the boy hums in his sleep. The tune is the same one the birds outside sing before dawn. There is a connection. Day 103, the shadow in the hallway has returned. It waits when the boy is alone. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Day 152, Ethan laughs at what he doesn't understand. He mocks the old ways. But they are watching. Day 201, I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes. In the nursery mirror. It wears his face. The entries became more fragmented after that. Symbols drawn in ink. Circles with slashes. Repeated phrases like, "It's not the boy they want. It's the man. He opened the door. And never closed it. And finally, the photo is the key. When he sees it, he will come looking. And that's when the choice must be made." Ethan dropped the notebook. For the first time in years, he felt true, bone-deep fear. Not for himself. For Jamie. The next day, he went to the boarding school in person. He didn't trust screens anymore. He needed to see Jamie with his own eyes. His son ran to him with open arms. Happy. Whole. "Hey, champ," Ethan whispered, holding him tightly. "You good?" Jamie nodded. "I missed you. Did you see Marisol yet?" The question stunned him. "She came to see you?" he asked, trying to stay calm. Jamie frowned. "No. But I dreamed about her. She said you'd find the book. And then you'd have to choose." Ethan crouched lower. "Choose what?" Jamie looked away. "She didn't say." Ethan didn't take him back home that night. He booked them both a hotel suite outside the city. Neutral ground. Jamie played with his tablet, seemingly unfazed. But Ethan barely slept. That night, at exactly 3:03 a.m., he woke to the sound of humming. Jamie was sitting upright in bed. Eyes closed. Lips moving. The tune was soft, familiar. It matched the one described in Marisol's notebook. When Ethan touched his shoulder, Jamie jolted awake. "Was I sleep-talking again?" "Yeah, buddy," Ethan said. "You okay?" Jamie nodded. "I think so. She says I'm protected. But you're not." "Who said that?" Jamie just looked at him for a long time. Then whispered. "The one in the mirror." The next morning, Ethan went to the only person he could think of. A woman named Dr. Amara Tells, a cultural historian and occult researcher who had worked with museums and even law enforcement. He showed her the notebook. The feather. The photo. Desperation made him reckless. She listened. Carefully. Intently. Then she asked. "Did Marisol ever mention the word pactum?" Ethan blinked. "No. But you saw the symbols. The feather. The child's hair." "Yes." Dr. Tells leaned forward. "There's a belief," she said, "in certain hidden traditions, not exactly witchcraft, not exactly religion, that some children are marked. Not possessed. Not cursed. Just, seen. By something ancient. And? Sometimes, that something watches the parent instead." Ethan swallowed hard. Why? She looked him dead in the eyes. Because the parent made a deal they don't remember. Or ignored a debt they inherited. And if Marisol wasn't a nanny, but a guardian, then she was never here for Jamie. Ethan sat back. She was here for me. Dr. Tells nodded. And now that she's gone, the bargain is open again. That night, Ethan returned to the townhouse. Alone. He went back to the nursery. He waited. At 3:03 a.m., the mobile above the crib began to spin. Slowly. Then faster. And in the reflection of the mirror across the room, just for a split second, he saw something. Something wearing his face. But smiling with someone else's mouth. The night was unnaturally still. Ethan stood in the nursery, eyes fixed on the mirror. His own reflection was distorted, an eerie half-smile tugging at the corners of his lips, something he knew wasn't his doing. The room was eerily quiet now. The mobile that had spun out of control just moments ago was still. His breath hitched as he slowly turned away, unable to shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. That thing that had looked back at him, it wasn't just a hallucination. It wasn't a trick of the light or a manifestation of his guilt. No. It was real. And it was him. But not entirely. Ethan stumbled back to the hallway, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the things that were happening. The truth was slipping through his fingers like water. He couldn't pin it down. Every time he thought he understood something, the ground shifted beneath him. He had thought it was Marisol, his nanny, his former employee, who had been manipulating things from the shadows. But now, it was clear, she hadn't been just a caretaker. She had been a guardian, a protector of something far deeper than a child. A protector of him. Why? Why him? The next morning, Ethan barely slept. The questions gnawed at him with a force he couldn't ignore. He could still see that disturbing reflection in the mirror. He could still feel the presence in the room, just behind him, watching. He had to know more. He thought of Dr. Amara Tells. Her words about the pactum, the ancient traditions, the forgotten bargains made by someone who had long since passed. He knew, deep down, that his search for answers had only just begun. It was time to confront his past, a past he had carefully buried for years. That afternoon, he made his way to the one place he had never truly returned to. The old farmhouse in the hills. The place where it all began. It had been years since Ethan last set foot on the property. He had avoided it, avoided everything about that part of his life, ever since his mother passed away. The house was still standing, though it was starting to show signs of age. The ivy that once adorned the walls now crept like a green shroud, covering the windows and the front door. A place that had once been full of memories now felt like a tomb. It had always been his mother's house, the place where she had raised him in solitude. Ethan never knew much about his father. His mother rarely spoke of him, and when she did, it was always in the same hushed, sorrowful tone. It wasn't until much later, after her death, that Ethan began to unravel the truth. He had come here to find something. He didn't know exactly what, but it had to be here. This house had been the setting of his childhood, a place where something unspoken had happened. Something that his mother had never fully explained. He unlocked the door with a key he hadn't used in years. The sound of the door creaking open sent a shiver down his spine. He stepped inside, the air thick with dust and memories. The house hadn't changed much since he left. The living room was the same as it had always been, the old armchairs facing a fireplace that no longer held warmth. The walls were lined with old photographs, many of which Ethan had never seen before. His mother had always kept to herself, but as a child, he remembered feeling a strange sense of comfort in her silence. It was the absence of something unsettling. Something hidden in the dark corners of their lives. He made his way to the study. The room was small, filled with bookshelves and old furniture. A large desk sat against one wall, and Ethan felt a strange pull toward it. It was here, in this room, that his mother had always spent her time, her writing desk, covered in papers and half-finished letters. Ethan pulled open one of the drawers and immediately found something that made his stomach tighten. A journal. It was his mother's. He opened it. The first few pages were filled with thoughts on life, memories of raising him alone, and a longing for a love that never came. But as he flipped through the pages, his heart began to race. There, at the end of the journal, was something far more chilling. A deal. The pactum. I never thought I would have to make it. But now that I have, I can only pray that it will be enough. Ethan is everything. He must be protected at all costs. But the price will be steep. I have made promises I can never undo. And I pray that one day, he will understand. I've seen the signs. I've felt the pull. The entity that watches us is old, ancient even. And I fear it is growing stronger. The pact is only temporary. He will have to choose, when the time comes. I can only hope that he will be ready. The words swam in front of his eyes. Ethan read them over and over, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His mother had made some kind of bargain. A pact. And the price had been his protection. His safety. But what was it that she had agreed to? What had she promised? And who was the entity she referred to? The answers weren't in the journal. They weren't in the house. But there was one more place. A place Ethan had sworn he would never return to. The basement. The door creaked as he opened it, revealing a dark and cold staircase leading down into the depths of the house. The basement had always been off-limits, even when he was a child. His mother had never let him down there. And after she died, the house had been sealed, locked and forgotten. But now, standing at the top of the stairs, Ethan felt a pull. A compulsion to know what lay hidden in the shadows. He descended into the darkness. The basement was damp and cold, the air thick with mildew and the smell of earth. He flicked on the light switch, and the single bulb above flickered to life, casting long shadows across the stone walls. Ethan scanned the room, his eyes falling on a large wooden chest in the corner. He knew immediately that this was what he was looking for. The chest was old, covered in dust and cobwebs. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears as he walked toward it, his fingers trembling as he reached for the lid. It creaked open slowly, and inside, he found a stack of old books. Some were ancient, others seemed newer, but all were written in languages he couldn't understand. At the top of the stack was an old wooden box, intricately carved with symbols that Ethan recognized. The same symbols from Marisol's notebook. His heart skipped a beat as he opened the box. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth, was something he hadn't expected to find. A ring. It was simple, yet somehow sinister. A silver band, engraved with strange markings. The inside of the ring glinted, as if it had been worn by someone long ago. And as Ethan touched the ring, something inside him shifted. A memory, or maybe it was a feeling, flooded his mind. It was the same memory. The one he had buried deep inside his mind. The one he hadn't thought about in years. He was a boy again. Standing in the dark corner of the basement, his mother holding him tightly, whispering something into his ear. He couldn't remember her words, but he remembered the feeling, the sense that something was wrong. That something was watching them. Then, she had slipped the ring onto his finger. "You're safe now," she whispered. But it wasn't safety. It was control. Ethan gasped, snapping out of the memory. He took the ring, clutching it tightly in his hand, and stumbled out of the basement. The truth was more terrifying than he had imagined. His mother hadn't just made a pact. She had bound him to something ancient. Something that had been watching him, and Jamie, for years. The next day, Ethan drove back to the city. His mind was racing. He had found the answers, but they only led to more questions. He wasn't just protecting Jamie. He wasn't just trying to stop whatever Marisol had been trying to shield them from. He was the one being watched. He was the one who had made the deal all those years ago. And now, he would have to face the consequences. Ethan had always thought of himself as a rational man. Even when the strange events started piling up, even when his mind started unearthing memories long buried in the recesses of his mind, he tried to maintain a sense of order, of logic. But the truth was now undeniable. What he had uncovered in that old farmhouse, the pact his mother had made, the ring she had placed on his finger, the whispers from the basement, it was real. And the more Ethan thought about it, the more he realized that the nightmare was just beginning. He couldn't escape it. The air around him felt charged, heavy with an unsettling presence that refused to let go. Even as he drove back to the city, the weight of the ring in his pocket seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He had to know more. He had to find a way to break free from the cycle, from whatever had been set in motion all those years ago. But as much as he tried to block out the thoughts, as much as he wanted to tell himself it was all just a figment of his imagination, there was something about the ring, something about the markings on it, that filled him with dread. It was like a time bomb ticking, waiting for the moment to go off. When Ethan got home, the house was eerily quiet. There were no sounds of Jamie playing in the other room, no hum of Marisol's soft voice as she moved about the house. The silence was unsettling, as though the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He walked toward the kitchen, but stopped dead in his tracks as he saw a figure standing in the doorway. Marisol. She was still in her nanny uniform, her dark eyes unreadable as she glanced over at him. Ethan felt a surge of frustration at her secrecy, her involvement in this tangled web of lies and ancient bargains. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. Marisol stepped inside, her gaze never leaving his face. She looked calm, almost too calm, but Ethan knew her well enough to recognize the tension in her body language. "I'm here because I have something to show you, Ethan," she said, her voice low but firm. "I think it's time you understood." Ethan clenched his jaw. He didn't trust her, not anymore. After everything he had uncovered, after the chilling revelations from the journal and the basement, he knew there was more to her story than she was letting on. "Understood what?" he asked, his voice tinged with anger. "You've been keeping things from me for so long, Marisol." "Why?" Her eyes softened, and for a moment, Ethan saw a flicker of something he hadn't expected, guilt. "I didn't want to tell you, not like this," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't hide it any longer. You're in danger, Ethan. From something much bigger than you realize." He frowned, feeling a mix of disbelief and confusion. "What are you talking about?" Marisol took a step forward, her hands trembling as she reached out and placed something in Ethan's hand, the same journal his mother had written in, the one he had found in the farmhouse. Ethan stared at it, his breath catching in his throat. "Where did you get this?" "I've known about the pact for years," she said softly, looking away for a moment. "I was there when your mother made it, Ethan. I watched her seal your fate." Her voice dropped lower, as though the words themselves were too heavy to say aloud. The revelation hit Ethan like a freight train. He staggered back, his hand instinctively clutching the journal tighter. It was impossible. Marisol had known all along. She had known about the pact, about the ring, about everything. He had trusted her, but now he realized she had been standing in the shadows, observing, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. He opened the journal again, his fingers trembling as he flipped to the last page. There, scrawled in his mother's handwriting, was a final entry. "I've failed him. The entity is already awake. The bargain cannot be undone. Only the one who wears the ring can break the cycle, but at a cost. My son, Ethan, is the key. The decision will come, and when it does, he will have to choose. He will have to face the darkness, or he will be consumed by it. The words seemed to echo in his head as he read them over and over. The entity, the dark force that had been haunting his family for generations. It was real. It was waiting for him. No, Ethan whispered, backing away. This can't be happening. This can't be real. Marisol's voice was soft, but it carried a weight of sadness. It's all true, Ethan. Your mother was the last to carry the burden, but now it's yours. And I'm afraid, if you don't act soon, it will claim you, just like it did her. Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him. The entity. The curse. The pact. He had been part of it his entire life, and now it was coming for him. What do I do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marisol stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. The ring is your only chance, Ethan. But it's not a simple fix. To break the pact, to destroy the entity, you will have to face it head-on. You'll have to confront the very thing your mother tried to protect you from. Ethan's heart raced in his chest. The thought of facing something so dark, something so evil, was almost too much to comprehend. But he didn't have a choice, did he? The entity was already aware of him. It was already waiting, lurking in the shadows, biding its time. He nodded slowly, determination hardening in his chest. Where do I start? Marisol's eyes flickered with something else, something hidden. But she didn't say anything, merely nodded toward the back of the house. There's one last thing you need to know. Ethan followed her toward the back room, the same room where his mother had kept her most precious belongings. She had always been so secretive about it. But now, as Marisol opened the door, the truth lay before him, a room filled with strange symbols, ancient artifacts, and books that seemed to have no place in the modern world. This, Marisol said, her voice hushed with reverence, is where the ritual was completed. This is where your mother made the pact. Ethan stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the shelves filled with objects that seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't understand. And then, at the center of the room, was a pedestal, and on the pedestal, an ancient book, bound in leather. It looked like something out of a nightmare. The Book of Shadows, Marisol whispered. It contains everything, every secret, every curse, every ritual. It's the key to ending it all. Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing the book's cover. He could feel a pull, an undeniable force urging him to open it. But deep inside, something was holding him back. Fear. Fear of what he might find, what he might unleash. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. No. He couldn't hesitate. He was already in this too deep. He opened the book. And in that moment, everything changed. Ethan sat in the dimly lit room, his heart racing as his fingers hovered over the ancient Book of Shadows. The dust that had settled on its leathery surface seemed to writhe and shift as if it held a life of its own. His mind buzzed with conflicting thoughts. Fear. Curiosity. Desperation. The weight of the truth he had uncovered so far was crushing, and yet, he knew that whatever lay between the pages of this book was the only thing standing between him and the malevolent force that had been haunting him since his birth. Marisol stood by the door, her face a mask of sorrow and resolve. She hadn't moved since Ethan opened the book. Her silence spoke volumes, and in that silence, Ethan understood. She was waiting. Waiting for him to make the inevitable choice. To confront the darkness. To accept the price. Ethan exhaled sharply and slowly opened the first page. The words were written in a language he didn't recognize, but as his eyes traced the symbols, a strange sense of familiarity washed over him. He felt the ring in his pocket pulse with warmth, and the same eerie energy that had lingered in the farmhouse basement seemed to hum around him. Suddenly, the words began to shift before his eyes. The ancient language was being replaced by something more comprehensible, something in his language. He read aloud, though his voice was shaky. The ritual of binding. To sever the ties between the living and the dark forces that bind them, the soul must offer something irreplaceable. The binding can only be undone by the one who wore the ring, the one marked from birth. But the entity must accept the offer. Should the entity refuse, the soul will be claimed, and the cycle shall begin anew. No one may interrupt. No one may witness. The price is blood. Ethan's throat tightened as he read the last sentence. Blood. It was always blood. The room seemed to grow colder, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and twist as if they were alive, watching, waiting. The weight of the ritual, the gravity of the price, hung heavily in the air. Marisol stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the book. Your mother knew this would happen, she whispered. She knew that one day, you would have to face the entity. And she knew the price would be steep. But she also knew that you could be the one to stop it. To break the cycle. Ethan could barely bring himself to speak. His voice was thick with disbelief. I have to sacrifice something? She nodded. Yes. You have to offer something irreplaceable, something that belongs to you, that the entity would crave, and that it cannot bear to lose. You must make the choice, Ethan. The words echoed in his head, swirling with fear and confusion. What could he possibly give up that would be enough? What could satisfy the dark entity, which had already taken so much from him? Blood. He whispered the word to himself, the full weight of it sinking in. Marisol's face grew more somber. It's not just your blood, Ethan. The ritual requires the essence of your being. Not just a sacrifice, but a choice of who you are. It's your soul that's at stake. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. His body was thrumming with an unrelenting energy, a terrifying need to break free from the suffocating pressure closing in on him. He wanted answers. He wanted to understand. But more than that, he wanted freedom, from the entity, from the pact, from everything that had held him in its dark grip for so long. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Ethan's voice cracked as he glared at Marisol. Why keep this from me? Marisol lowered her head, and Ethan saw the faintest trace of tears in her eyes. Because I couldn't. I couldn't burden you with this knowledge, Ethan. You weren't ready to face it. You had to come to it on your own. And even now. I'm afraid it may be too late. A chill ran down his spine. Could it be? Was the entity already too powerful to stop? Ethan clutched the ring in his pocket, feeling the cold metal dig into his skin. The same ring his mother had placed on his finger when he was a child. He remembered the moment so vividly, the quiet, almost eerie whispers that had filled the room, his mother's hands trembling as she slid the ring onto his finger. You're safe now, she had whispered. But was he? Ethan opened the book again, determined to uncover whatever else he could. The page he turned to now had a diagram, an intricate illustration of the ritual in action. In the center, there was a dark, swirling vortex. And from it, a pair of eyes stared out, eyes full of hunger and malice. The entity. He shuddered. Around the vortex were inscriptions, runes that seemed to shimmer on the page, almost as if they were alive. Ethan's eyes skimmed over the symbols, tracing the words with his fingers as though the answers lay in the strokes of ink. The blood must be spilled at the stroke of midnight, when the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest. Only the one marked by the ring may begin the ritual, but the entity must recognize the sacrifice. If the entity accepts the offering, it will be banished for good. If not, the soul shall be forfeit. The price is final. Ethan felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead as the words burned into his brain. His fingers trembled as he closed the book, his head spinning. The price was final. If the entity didn't accept the offering, he would die. The thought gnawed at him, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. A small voice, faint and distant, echoed in his mind. The voice of his mother. Ethan, you are the key. He knew, in that moment, that there was no way out. This wasn't just about breaking the pact. This wasn't just about saving himself. This was about something far bigger. The very fabric of his existence was bound to the curse. He had to face the entity. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into eternity as Ethan stared at the ring in his hand. The weight of the decision bore down on him. His mind raced, his thoughts spiraling into chaos. He glanced at Marisol. "You said I was the one who could end this. How?" Marisol hesitated, and for the first time, Ethan saw a crack in her confident facade. "You must offer something irreplaceable to the entity. Something that it desires above all else. Your soul, Ethan, your soul is the final key." Ethan felt his throat tighten. The soul? What was that supposed to mean? He looked at her in disbelief. "But I don't have anything left to give. My life is already at the mercy of this thing." "Not your life," she replied softly. "Your identity. What makes you who you are. The entity feeds on that. You've been marked from birth, Ethan, and the ring is what keeps you tethered to both the human world and the darkness." He was silent for a moment. Could it be that simple? Could he truly end this nightmare by sacrificing who he was? Could he survive it? "I'm not sure I understand," Ethan said quietly, shaking his head. "How do I even begin?" Marisol stepped closer, her eyes soft with compassion. "You begin by choosing. You decide who you are. And you decide if you're willing to sacrifice that to destroy the entity." Ethan looked at the clock. Midnight was fast approaching. The air in the room grew thick with the presence of something ancient, something he couldn't escape. He had no choice. He would have to offer himself. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into eternity. The air in the room was thick with an otherworldly energy, as though every breath Ethan took was weighted with the potential for life or death. Midnight was fast approaching, and with it, the moment of reckoning. Ethan stood frozen in place, his eyes fixed on the ring in his hand. He could feel its cold weight, the strange pull it had over him, a pull that had been there since his earliest memories, a constant, quiet presence in the background of his life. His mind raced, and his heart hammered in his chest. Marisol's words echoed in his mind. The entity feeds on what makes you who you are. You must choose, Ethan. You must decide if you're willing to sacrifice yourself, your very essence, to destroy it. He had been living under the shadow of this curse for as long as he could remember, but now, in the face of the ritual, the cost of breaking it was more terrifying than anything he had ever imagined. His fingers trembled as they brushed over the ring. The Book of Shadows was open in front of him, its pages fluttering gently in the breeze from the open window, as though the book itself was alive, waiting for him to make his decision. Marisol's voice broke through the tension in the room. Ethan, you have to act now. The entity will sense your hesitation. It won't wait forever. You can either make the offering, or it will claim you, and everyone you love. Ethan glanced at her, his expression a mixture of fear and confusion. But, what does it want? What am I supposed to offer? Marisol took a deep breath and looked down at the floor, as though searching for the right words. It's not about what you offer physically. It's about who you are, Ethan. The entity doesn't want just your life, it wants your identity. It wants the very thing that makes you, you. The words hit him like a blow. His identity? The entity wanted his soul, his essence. Everything he had ever been, everything that defined him. Your mother made the pact to protect you, Marisol continued softly. But she knew that one day, you would have to make the ultimate sacrifice to destroy it. To break the curse. Ethan's mind was spinning. He was standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into the darkness, knowing that his next step would determine his fate. But how could he possibly give up who he was? His identity was all he had left. He had spent his life chasing success, wealth, and power, only to find that it meant nothing in the face of this ancient, unrelenting force. And now, at the end of everything, the very thing he had worked so hard to build was at risk of being destroyed. He glanced at Marisol again, her face still as pale as ever. Her eyes were filled with something he couldn't quite place, sorrow, perhaps. Or maybe something more. "You knew this would happen," he said, his voice low. "You knew all along." Marisol nodded, her expression filled with regret. "I did. I tried to warn you, Ethan. I tried to protect you. But you have to understand, this is the only way. The only way to free yourself, and everyone else, from the entity's grip." His pulse quickened. Was this it? Was this the moment that would decide whether he lived or died? Whether the darkness would consume him, or whether he could finally break free? A sudden gust of wind swept through the room, and the ring in his hand began to glow faintly. It pulsed with an eerie light, as though it were alive. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he felt an overwhelming presence fill the room, a force so dark and powerful that it seemed to warp the very air around him. The entity was here. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and twist, gathering together in a single, dark mass. Ethan's heart raced as he turned to face it, his hands trembling with fear. From the darkness, two glowing eyes emerged, eyes that were full of hunger, full of desire. The entity spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through Ethan's bones. "You cannot escape, Ethan. You have been marked from birth. You belong to me." Ethan's stomach churned with dread, but he refused to back down. He clenched the ring tightly in his hand, feeling its cold, familiar weight. "You don't control me," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I'm not the same person you manipulated all those years ago." The entity laughed, a sound that was both terrifying and mocking. "You think you have power over me, boy? You have nothing. You are nothing but a tool. A pawn in the game of fate." Ethan's mind raced. The entity was right. He had been its pawn his entire life, bound to this curse by the ring, by the pact his mother had made. But he wasn't going to let it claim him, not without a fight. "Then what do you want from me?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising. "Tell me. What do I have to give to break this curse?" The entity's eyes glowed brighter, its form flickering in and out of existence like a shadow cast by fire. "Your soul. Your essence. The very core of who you are. That is the price, Ethan. That is what I want." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The price was his soul. It always had been. But the words from the book echoed in his mind. The price is final. He had a choice. He could offer his soul, and in doing so, destroy the entity once and for all, or he could refuse, and the entity would claim him, along with everything he held dear. Ethan closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He thought of Jamie, his son. He thought of Marisol, the woman who had cared for him and his family, who had helped him uncover the truth. He thought of his mother, and the sacrifices she had made to protect him. No. He couldn't let the entity win. He couldn't let it take everything from him. When he opened his eyes, he felt a clarity he hadn't experienced before. He looked at the ring, the symbol of his connection to the curse. He raised it up, staring at it as though he were looking at the very essence of his life. "I offer myself," he said, his voice strong and resolute. "I offer my soul. I give you my essence, my identity. I choose to break the cycle." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the entity spoke again, its voice laced with malice. "So be it." The room seemed to tremble as the shadows surged forward, enveloping Ethan. But instead of swallowing him whole, the darkness seemed to pull away, recoiling as if in fear. Ethan's body was flooded with a strange sensation, as though the very core of his being was being ripped from him. Pain surged through his chest, and he fell to his knees, gasping for breath. The entity's laughter filled the room, but this time, it sounded weak, uncertain. And then, suddenly, there was light. A blinding, pure light that swept through the room, banishing the shadows, dissolving the entity's form into nothingness. Ethan felt the weight of the curse lift from his shoulders, the ring falling from his hand and clattering to the floor. The room fell silent. Ethan's breathing slowed as the pain subsided. His body felt light, almost weightless. He had done it. He had broken the cycle. He had freed himself, and everyone he loved. Marisol approached him, her face a mixture of awe and sadness. "You did it, Ethan. You broke the curse." Ethan nodded, still trembling. He looked down at his hands, as though he expected to see something different, something changed. "You're free," Marisol said, her voice filled with quiet reverence. As the dawn broke over the horizon, Ethan stood alone in the room, his heart heavy with the weight of the choice he had made. He had sacrificed everything, his soul, his identity, but in doing so, he had saved himself and those he loved. The entity was gone. The curse was broken. But in the silence that followed, Ethan knew one thing for certain: no one could ever truly escape their past.